Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone for attending this webinar on the basics of AAC. Hari gave you a little bit about my background. Again, I'm a speech-language pathologist. I've been in the field of communication disorders and autism for over 30 years now. If you want additional information on my background or services that I provide, I have on my website listed on the slide that I have showing for you all. So since we have a very short amount of time, we only have about 45 minutes for the webinar, and then we're going to leave about 15 minutes for question and answer. I definitely want to get started on this. So starting off, since this is the basics, what is AAC? This is probably a term that you hear, especially speech-language pathologists throw out all the time. And as an SLP, I realize, oh my goodness, I use this term a lot, but there are oftentimes people that don't understand what this term means. It stands for, it's an acronym that stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And what is augmentative alternative communication? It's a system that is individually designed specific to meet the needs of the user, to give them like an alternative way to communicate. And in the definition that I have up on the screen right now, I have two key words highlighted because these are concerns that I have greatly for all of my users, AAC users. Not only does it give them an alternative way to communicate, but an alternative way to spontaneously and functionally communicate. And by spontaneously, I mean that they're not prompted to do so. Someone's not saying, push this, show me this. So if my AAC user is a functional communicator, they are able to do so spontaneously. They can get their wants and needs met without having someone else to direct them. Augmentative means that can be pictures, speech-generating devices, sign language, written word. There's lots of ways that people can communicate augmentatively. I've listed just a few AAC myths, and I just want to start off by saying that there is research to dispel these myths. And these are oftentimes concerns that I hear parents say. I have parents that have said, that they don't want us to use AAC because they're concerned that their child won't learn to talk if they're given an alternative means to communicate. And I can tell you there is so much research in the field of AAC to dispel this particular myth. If a person has the physical ability to produce speech sounds, combine those sounds together into words into utterances, using AAC, verbal skills become a positive byproduct of that. And I have seen this happen many times in the students that I support who are very limited in their verbal skills, and many of which don't have any verbal skills. And once we've started using AAC, it has greatly enhanced their development of verbal skills. So I just want to say lots of research to support this. AAC should only be implemented after giving all hope of the child ever talking. This myth to me is you waste a lot of time. All right, if you're just focusing on getting the child to talk, you're wasting a lot of time in teaching this child how to be a functional communicator, which is what an AAC system will teach them. If my child can talk, even if it's just a little bit, they do not need AAC. And even if they can only talk a little bit, are they able then to communicate all of their wants and needs? And what I have found with so many of the students that I work with, they have lots to communicate about. And if their verbal skills are extremely limited, then I've seen some frustration and anxiety because they are so limited in what they're able to communicate. But if we give them an AAC system, we just open up that door for communication. The last myth, my child doesn't have the language or cognitive prerequisite skills for AAC. I can tell you that as a speech-language pathologist, my national organization, ASHA, totally dispels this myth. They say we in fact ASHA has a position statement that says that there is no prerequisite skill needed for AAC. And I've sometimes, because I'm in the schools, I'm an educational autism consultant down in the school, sometimes I will have educational professionals tell me that a particular student is just cognitively functioning at too young of a level. And again, there is no prerequisite skills for AAC. I've had some students that are cognitively at a very young level, and we've been able to teach them some very basic AAC systems. So just want to dispel these myths. Next question, does your child or your student need an AAC system? This is a very big question. And here are questions that I consider in making that determination. First of all, do they use a conventional or an idiosyncratic way to communicate? And by idiosyncratic, I mean, do they use like an unusual way to communicate? You know, conventional would be a typical method. Idiosyncratic would be an unusual. And probably the most important question of all, and I ask this quite often, can they pass the stranger test? And by that I mean, if an unfamiliar communicative partner is there, can that unfamiliar communicative partner understand whatever this person is trying to communicate? Oftentimes when I'm going out into school, I am the stranger. And so when I have a student, which this happened, I had a student that came up to me, and he came up to me and he went, psst, psst, psst. And I had no idea what he wanted. And so the teacher chimed in very quickly, and she said, oh, that means he wants a drink of water. So he failed the stranger test, but thank goodness the teacher was there to be the interpreter, or there would have been a major communication breakdown. And it might have resulted in some increased stress and anxiety for this student as a result. So that would definitely be what I would consider an idiosyncratic way to communicate. So for this particular student, you know, he definitely was in need of a functional communication system, and we went with AAC because he was very limited with his verbal skills. So very important, educational professionals, private therapists, parents, family members, to consider, could your child, could your student, could your client pass the stranger test? Because if they cannot, if whatever communication system that they're using right now, if it's not universal and not everyone could understand them, then you have already limited this person's ability to communicate with everyone. And as a result, there will be communication breakdowns. I do not want my students to need an interpreter to go along with them. I want them to be independent, functional, and spontaneous with their communication. So next question, where to start? And oftentimes everybody starts, well, obviously we start with a communication device because we're talking about AAC. And what I want to share with you is, yes, we will talk about, you know, starting with devices and important things to consider, but hand in hand with looking at AAC devices, systems, and apps, it's also very important to look at how can we increase these core language skills that absolutely contribute to the development of communication. And these core language skills can be focused on whether the child is verbal or nonverbal, and I can also tell you that anyone can provide intervention or can address these core language skills. Parents, family members, teachers, private therapists, anyone can address this. So if these skills are strengthened, these core language skills, it will absolutely have a positive impact on the child or the person's development of spontaneous and functional communication skills. So to me, increasing these skills goes hand in hand with doing an assessment and looking at, you know, what kind of an AAC system can we utilize or best meets the needs of this user. And I also want to mention that these core language skills are developed by 12 months of age in neurotypically developing babies. So by 12 months, these skills are all pretty fully developed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly give you an explanation of each one of these, and then I'm going to briefly give you some ideas for intervention, and then from there we will move into talking about specifically AAC systems, devices, apps, etc. So cause and effect. What is cause and effect? I think everyone knows this, but it's an action or event that produces a certain response. All right, so they touch something and it makes a noise, or they touch an iPad screen and the iPad screen does something. So basic cause and effect. Object permanence. This is understanding that objects continue to exist, all right, even if they can't be seen, heard, or touched. In neurotypically developing babies, this appears by around 9 months of age. And I always give the example, at 5 months of age, or less than 9 months, around 5, 6 months of age, when neurotypically developing babies are separated from their parents, at 5 to 6 months, they typically don't show any kind of distress. Why? Because object permanence is not fully developed. So when they're separated from their parents, if their parents leave them with a sitter or daycare or whatnot, the child hasn't yet developed the concept that their parents continue to exist even though they can't be seen. Around 9 months of age, though, this is when the neurotypically developing baby can oftentimes start showing distress when their parents leave them, and that's because the babies have developed this very important core language skill of object permanence. Imitation. I think you all know what imitation is. Looking at another person and being able to do the exact same objects, vocalizations, verbalizations. Very important for people to realize, though, imitation is present at birth. Sally Rogers has done a lot of research into this with newborn babies, showing that newborn babies can imitate various oral motor movements, tongue protrusions, etc. And imitation is such an important skill for communication development because we are especially in early language development, they are listening, they are hearing, they are watching, they are seeing, and they are imitating all of our communicative models that we're giving them. So very critical. Language starts with sharing a thought, and this is what joint attention is all about, sharing a thought. All right, and that's what language communication is all about. Communication is not something that's done in isolation. It's done with someone else. So this is what we consider a very pivotal core communication skill that greatly needs to be focused on and developed to be assured that our kiddos that need AAC systems become good language users. Joint attention is very complex, and I'm just giving you a very brief definition here, but it's basically sharing another person's attention to a third object or event. All right, so, and purely for the pure social enjoyment of sharing that attention with another person. So this could be done in a number of different ways. I could use gestures to garner someone's attention to something. I could use vocalizations. I could use verbalizations. All right. Gesture could be, it could be as simple as eye gaze. If I start looking at something, I can garner someone's attention to look at that object. Neurotypically developing babies can follow another person's eye gaze at 6 to 8 months of age. I can do it vocally by saying, oh, making a gasping sound, and people will look at what I'm looking at, or by verbally by saying, look, all right, or I can point and say, look. And again, it's for the pure social enjoyment of sharing attention. I just want someone else to look at what I'm looking at. I'm not pointing at something to get my wants and needs met. That is not joint attention. That's something entirely different. So that's, again, joint attention developed by 12 months of age in neurotypically developing babies. I have, again, a couple of other points on this slide. Following a point reference and then looking back to the parent to acknowledge the shared attention. All right, this looking back is a real critical phase in the development of joint attention, and this typically occurs around 10 to 12 months of age in neurotypically developing babies. So again, it's not only looking when someone is saying, look, but it's also looking back at the person that initiated to acknowledge, oh, I did see that. Children that struggle with joint attention, sometimes what you'll see, red flag indicators, might be a limited response to their name being called to garner their attention, even though, again, their hearing might be just fine, but using their name to garner their attention, it might be limited. Or limited use of eye gaze to regulate social interactions. You know, babies in that first year of life, they use a lot of eye gaze with others to regulate, to engage in those social interactions. And babies that are struggling with that, or any person that's struggling in that, might have limited use of some of those nonverbal behaviors, which kind of segues perfectly into this next core communicative function, gestural behaviors or nonverbal behaviors. And again, in that first year of life, because babies aren't talking, they are using all of the nonverbal behaviors, gestures, eye gaze, to communicate their wants and needs by pointing, giving, showing, reaching, opening up, using their hands to communicate their wants and needs. Reciprocal interactions, it's again another core language skill developed definitely by 12 months, but it starts at birth. And turn taking is the basic foundation for this. All right, understanding that when you engage with another person, it's a back and forth interaction. People who struggle with this developmental skill will struggle with conversational turn taking. And I know, although we're talking about AAC today, I have many students that I work with autism spectrum disorder that are incredibly verbal, highly verbal, and do not need AAC systems, but they struggle tremendously with conversational turn taking. And so we have focused greatly on this very core language skill of teaching them how to engage in reciprocal back and forth interactions, and usually starting with just playing basic games. Understanding sharing, how to make compromises, in school, raising hand, waiting for the teacher to call. These would all be understanding how to engage in reciprocal interactions. Real briefly, some intervention for these core language skills. Cause and effect, there are so many different sound and movement toys out there, bubbles. There are also lots of awesome, if you're using any of the eye technology, like the iPad or iPod, there are many different cause and effect apps where you touch the screen and fireworks burst or bubbles pop, etc. So the technology has been awesome for many of my students with ASD to work on this very basic cause and effect skill. Object permanence, there's a reason we play peekaboo with babies. It's to teach them object permanence. Hiding highly desired items in full view, and then entice them to lift up the blanket or to pull off the napkin to find that favorite item or food. Imitation. I always start off, if I have a student that's struggling in this area, I start off by focusing on imitating their actions. And it's very interesting when they realize, all of a sudden, they look at me and they realize I'm doing the same thing as them. And then they'll start engaging in more purposeful actions, look at me to see if I'm going to imitate. So that's always where I start when I'm teaching and focusing on imitation. There are a number of different ways that you can work on imitation, imitating motor actions, where just basic clapping, rubbing your tummy, patting your head, imitating acting on objects. So you might have a set of blocks and you're going to build up a tower, knock them down, or Play-Doh where you're rolling it into a snake. There are many apps out there that will imitate vocalizations, verbalizations, sounds that are made by people. And I have, again, a lot of students that love apps that if they make a sound, all of a sudden the app, makes that sound right back at them. So that's just another way to focus on that. Joint attention, I always use highly desired items, and I will call the child's name, and then when they look, I'll reward them with that desired item. I do a lot of exaggerated pointing and verbalizing. Look! Developing anticipatory behaviors through social routines like tickle games, peekaboo, ready, set, go, and where we pause, look at the child, all right, look at our hands, look at the object, to try and draw their attention to those social routines that many of these kiddos love. Joint attention can also be focused on during gross motor play, where you intermittently stop the action, and when the child looks at you, you re-engage. wind-up toys, blowing up a balloon, saying, look, and when they look, releasing the balloon. Bubbles are also great for working on joint attention, saying, look, to draw the child's attention to the bubbles, and when they do look, blow more bubbles. Gestural communication, exhibiting, again, those exaggerated facial expressions to denote different emotions, exaggerated motions for them to come or to give me, pointing at items of interest like pictures in books, fabulous. That helps to develop gestural communication. Modeling for them arms up, all right, if they want to be picked up. Different gestures, to indicate little social routines like tickle games that they might like. And then reciprocity. I always say you cannot engage in enough turn-taking activities with any child that struggles with communication, whether verbal or not. And reciprocal activities can start with very basic rolling, pushing a ball back and forth, or a car, zooming a car back and forth. Taking turns just simply putting items into a container, dropping blocks into a box, shape sorters, puzzle pieces, and games. Incorporating gestures and pictures to indicate turns also helps these kiddos learn whose turn it is, to anticipate whose turn. And this is just a picture of a visual support that I call a mind turn taking. And so whoever's turn it is, they have this visual, and that way it helps the child to be able to visually note whose turn it is by looking for this visual support, and then to also anticipate when will it be their turn. So those core communication skills, those core language skills that I just went over, I think need to very much be addressed by everyone. Again, this is just not school-based or private therapists. Parents, family members can certainly address those core communication skills in addition to looking at putting in place an AAC system. It's not like we do the core language skills separate from this. All right, they can be done definitely together. So when we're looking at AAC systems, all right, and trying to determine what AAC system, I do want you all to know that there is an assessment process, whether it's within a school district or private SLPs, and this is important, all right, because we just don't pick an AAC system for a student and determine that's going to be the best system for that AAC, the person that needs AAC, because there are so many different individual user needs that might not fit with the particular device that you pick if you have not done a feature match, if you've not done some trials with these different systems. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's low tech or high tech, but this is critical. There needs to be an assessment. There needs to be data taken. There are many different companies, school districts, special education cooperatives, that have trials with many of these different devices, as well as trials with the apps. And I do want to point out, since Avaz, is sponsoring this, there are hundreds of AAC apps out there. And I always want people to understand every one of those AAC apps I consider as a separate AAC device or AAC system. So when we're looking at trying to figure out which app might best fit our user, again, trials and collecting data. So that's very important to keep in mind as well too. And to me, what's most important is which system can the child access and spontaneously use the most efficient. That is what is critical. So that's where you start with AAC. A few important things to keep in mind when you're starting to set up, your individual's needs. Is what's the layout going to be? Because these different devices and different apps can have different ways of giving the information that they might need for communication. So there's something called visual scenes, and this is where it's like a photograph of a location or a scene that is familiar to that to the person that needs AAC, and within that photograph, communication hotspots can be set up. So if it's a device like a voice output device or even an app, if they touch a certain area of the photograph, the photo on the device, it might speak for them. So for example, if it's a photo of a play area and they touch a certain toy, it might be, here, I would like to play with the musical instruments, or in the kitchen, if they touch the photo of the refrigerator that's in the photo of the kitchen, it might say, I would like, something to drink. So a visual scene is typically very concrete and easier to understand and associate for that very, very concrete learner. Traditional grid display, which many of our AAC systems and apps have, it's more abstract. But again, these are just the two different layouts that need to be considered. And on the screen right now, you all should see I have on the left a traditional grid display, all right, where the person is connecting, different communicative messages. They're selecting different messages to communicate something. And then over on the right would be an example of a visual scene display. So again, it's a photograph, concrete photograph of a lunch tray. And hotspots, you can see, are around actually every food item on there. So if it were a voice output device, if the person touched one of those hotspots, it would verbally communicate. Traditional grid and visual scene can also both be done low-tech, as well as high-tech. So the layout is important to consider. Something else that is very critical to consider is what visual system do they understand, all right? And I have had many students that have been at a very concrete level of understanding, very concrete level, and they've struggled with understanding things like photographs, line drawings, written word. And so we might have started with using objects as their communication system, where they hand us an object to communicate some of their wants and needs. And then from there, with modeling, something called aided language intervention that I'll talk about right before we stop, we've been able to progress them to understand, again, some more abstract visual symbol systems. So, but this is also something important to consider. This is a question that I get asked a lot. What should be the vocabulary? All right, and what's most important to keep in mind is it should be the vocabulary that is motivating for the user to communicate. A lot of times we put in the vocabulary that we think they're going to want to use, and I have found many of my students are not using their devices or systems. And then when I look at them, I realize, well, of course, they're not very motivated to communicate bathroom to us, so maybe we should have some more fun vocabulary in there, all right, that might be more motivating to them. So I say this often, they're not going to communicate about something that is not motivating. I think it's very important that AAC systems, that the user has the ability to make requests. These are language functions that I'm talking about now, requests to get their wants and needs met, whether it's requesting objects, requesting actions, all right? So there needs to be vocabulary in there to meet those needs. I think there always needs to be vocabulary so that they can communicate all done. This is critical. I have had many students that have had high anxiety and sometimes challenging behaviors because they want to be all done with something, and they don't have a way to communicate that except through behaviors. So we need to make sure that we build that into their AAC system and teach them that. And then lastly, primary communicative function is how to ask for help. And so, requesting, communicating, all done, help, to me that's minimum. We need to have that vocabulary in there. Add vocabulary as the user's needs increase, or their interest or wants. I recommend to folks keeping what I call a communication breakdown diary, which can just be like a written list in a notebook or on a clipboard, so that if you realize, oh my goodness, he doesn't know, we haven't built this, this message into his system or device yet, just keeping this list so that this vocabulary, it's very fluid, can continually be added. And then lastly, very importantly, include peer level language and vocabulary. All right, make it so they sound like their peers. So put in some of the fun statements and things that other 15-year-olds or 5-year-olds are saying right now, and that increases that motivation. Few ideas to expand the user's ability to request objects and actions. I've had people say he doesn't communicate because, you know, he's just not motivated. And I'll say, well, how does he get his wants and needs met? And people will say, well, he does it all on his own. And I'll say, well, then we need to set up situations so that they have to communicate. Because if we don't, and they get all their wants and needs met on their own, we have just limited the number of opportunities for them to communicate. So some things that you can do are putting items that are highly motivating or interesting, putting those out of reach. And I've had some kiddos, that has been quite the chore, all right, because they are very adept at putting like benches on top of chairs, on top of counters, and climbing up and balancing very precariously to get some things that they need. But I just think that's very important, all right? If we want our child to learn to communicate, we're going to have to rearrange the environment somewhat so that if there is that motivation factor. Another very easy thing to do, leave out necessary items that are needed to complete a task. All right, so you give them ice cream but no spoon, you know, and if they're looking at you, you know, that's where you're kind of gesturing back like, I don't know, what do you need? Or gesturing or prompting to their device, or even modeling using aided language intervention. Giving them a color book with no crayons, giving them something to cut out without the scissors. So leaving out necessary items. I call this sometimes sabotaging a task. To getting them to request actions. Adults are just very nice, and we jump in all the time and do things for especially our kiddos, our students that need help, and I'm always like, stop, avoid jumping in, all right, give them those opportunity to request, like pushing on swings. If they're just sitting there, all right, rather than just going up and starting to push them, all right, give them that opportunity to communicate, model for them how they can communicate that on their system. Opening up doors, containers, social choice board, like chase, tickle, dance, whatever it is that they're motivated by. Getting them to expand their ability to communicate all done. I always say make this part of the end of a routine, all right? So if it's the end of meals, modeling, all right, how do they communicate all done? If they seem like they're bored or they're exhibiting some behaviors, trying to get away from an activity, whether, you know, again, modeling for them. This is an easy way that you can let us know you want to be all done. Very important, though, when you're teaching all done, is that initially, if they do communicate all done, it needs to be honored. So the request needs to be honored. I've had some students that have exhibited some very significant challenging behaviors because they're trying to communicate all done. And these are students that don't have the verbal means to do so, nor have they been given an augmentative means to do so, so they use behaviors. And I have even had some students that have increased the behaviors because when they have exhibited seemingly minor behaviors to communicate all done, people have not honored that communicative request. So I had a student that used to throw things when he was all done. And so the teachers would make him pick everything up that he threw, and then he would just continue to throw things. Well, when he realized throwing wasn't working, they're not understanding, I want to be all done. They're making me to continue to work. They're making me pick these things up. He escalated the behavior, and he started biting his wrists. And he escalated even further to bite his wrist until his wrists would start bleeding. So once it got to that level of the behavior, typically whoever was working with him would stop. All right, so again, he had to escalate the intensity of the behavior for people to understand he wants to be all done. When again, something as simple as a low-tech, all-done picture could have been modeled for him at the beginning signs of agitation, fidgeting, he wants to be all done. And when I talked to his team about teaching him this, they said, well, if we teach him this, then he's going to tell us he wants to be all done all the time when we don't want him to. And I said, if he learns that skill and totally realizes all I have to do is hand this picture or hit a button that says all done, and I said, then that's huge because you've taught him to communicate this. Once he has learned that, then you can start shaping the work that needs to be done before he can be all done. And those are what I call receptive communication tools. But this expressive is huge. Ideas to expand your child's ability to communicate help. This is something else that we jump in all the time. I've noticed particularly in schools where I see students needing help and people are just rushing right over, helping them get their coats on or off, zipped up, unzipped, shoes on, off, bathroom routine, washing hands in the cafeteria. And I'm always telling people, stop helping, all right, so that we can give this person, all right, a chance, an opportunity so that they can communicate help. And again, providing those models so that they learn this is a situation where I can ask for help. Asking for help is what I consider, again, one of those critical life skills. And this is, again, just a basic low tech, all right, just an I need help helping hand that I tell people, make sure you have these everywhere and provide that model when they're in any of these situations and might need some assistance. Moving on to instruction in the use of AAC systems. This is very important, all right, because what I've learned in my 30-plus years in the field is that when we give a student an AAC system, a lot of times people just expect that this kiddo is going to know how to communicate using this system. And it takes lots of instruction on our part, whether it's the educators, SLPs, parents, family members, in providing instruction so that they are competent AAC users. And it absolutely takes time. Just to give you an awesome analogy to this is that, in that first year of life, we speak to babies from birth on. We're talking to babies. So we are giving them thousands of hours of language models. Yet, we do not expect any baby in that first year of life to talk to us until they're about 12 months, all right? Now, granted, some babies might be early talkers and talk at 9 months, but, up until 12, 15 months, if they're not talking, that's all fine. That's all still within that neurotypically developing range. But have we been providing them with instruction? Absolutely. Our instruction has been our verbal models to them. So when we think about our person who we have given an AAC system to, we definitely need to give them this same consideration in giving them these models. So we definitely need to provide our folks who are AAC users with many, many models of how to use their systems. And here's the kicker, without expecting them to reciprocate. Oftentimes I'll see people giving a model and then they want that child to model and then they want that child to do it spontaneously. All right, when we're providing that model and the initial instruction, all right, we're just showing them this is how it does, this is how they can communicate this message. I am not expecting that they have to do exactly what I just did. And why is that? Because when I go back to this slide, when I'm talking to that baby that's 1 month old, I'm surely not expecting that baby to talk back to me, but I'm giving that baby the model. Same thing works with our AAC users. So aided language intervention it's an instructional strategy where, again, the AAC user is given ongoing modeling of their systems in functional contexts, and again, by any communicative partner. All right, and this is where I find a lot of times, especially with my students, their peers are fabulous because I have the peers, many of my students who are AAC users, they're neurotypically developing peers, are fascinated by these AAC systems, and they're always over wanting to, can I do that? Can I hit this button? And I'm like, absolutely. I want their peers to be involved. I want them to be able to communicate with their peers, not just with the adults that are in their environment. So if the peers are showing an interest and the peers can provide the models, to me that's even better. All right, so again, we're giving them that intensive receptive language stimulation without the expectation or pressure, all right, that expressive is going to occur. AAC is part of the input as well as the output. And that's really what aided language intervention is. All right, we're just modeling for them. All right, we're giving them, teaching them how to use these systems. It really makes that language visible for them, and again, regardless of what AA system is being used. And as I said, everyone can do it, parents, siblings, grandparents. Generally, when you start off, you can start off easy, modeling what I call the main words versus trying to make sure you get every single word in there. All right, just modeling the main words. And it can be used in any activity or context. And this, again, is highly motivating to our AAC users. Seeing other people use their systems absolutely increases their desire to use their systems. Just a few random thoughts before I'm checking my time, and I'm right on time, amazingly, before I stop for question and answers. But just a few random thoughts that I'm throwing out here is that, and I use the term children. I apologize for those of you that work with adults who are, AAC users. I work in the educational system, so that just tends to be a term that just flows all the time. But these folks need to learn why they need to communicate versus press this. And I have seen many AAC users become prompt-dependent communicators because people are saying, oh, look, can you show Susan blue on your device? Here, touch this. So it becomes kind of what I call show me tricks versus teaching them how to use their AAC system to functionally communicate. So I'm a huge proponent for setting up functional activities to teach them this. I do a lot of joint activity routines, which are highly familiar, repetitive activities. It can be something as simple as blowing bubbles, making chocolate milk, playing with Play-Doh, but they're highly familiar and repetitive, so it's like the language is used again and again. And those functional activities I have found have been just very important for teaching my AAC users, again, how to communicate and why to communicate versus just press this or show me. Give them opportunities for lots of practice. So that concludes our webinar on AAC Basics. And now I'm going to look to my screen where I have the chat window open. So, we have, I think, Hari, correct, the next 10-15 minutes available for any questions that people might have?
Yeah, Susan, we do have around 10 minutes for question and answers, and I have received a few queries. Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a question from Marcel. Marcel wants to know how can I integrate communication opportunities into the child's life?
Can you put that in the chat window so that I can visually see that question?
Sure.
All right. Okay. Okay, how can I integrate communication opportunities into the child's daily life? That's a great question. When I'm in the schools, what I do is that we start with when they arrive at school, all right? Let's focus on when they arrive at school and they're hanging up their belongings, in their locker or their cubby area. What might be something that we notice that they need to learn to communicate? Oftentimes it's help, because I have students that need help with maybe getting off their backpacks or hanging or taking off their coat or hanging that up. So we will actually kind of outline their day and just look at the different activities that occur over the course of the day and determine, okay, we're going to focus on for their arrival that they're going to ask for help. And then we look at, okay, and then how are they going to ask for help? Is it going to be a low-tech helping hand? Are we going to have their communication system, their device, their app right there ready for that so that we can model that? So again, just kind of going through their day and looking at what could be communicative targets. And this could actually be done at both home and at school, so when they wake up, if they come in, into the kitchen and they want something for breakfast, so maybe I would say, breakfast, we're going to target, them being able to request their wants and needs. All right, so again, just looking for those communicative opportunities and charting out what that might look like over the course of a day.
Okay, great. Right, Susan. I think that does answer Marcel's question. We have a question from Andrea. Andrea, I'm just bringing you that question, but for the benefit of our other participants, the question is, when modeling, should the model be for what the child could say in a given situation, or you as the communication partner's thoughts or ideas and conversational turns, or both? So basically, I think it's a deep question into modeling. I have just pinged you on the chat window, Susan.
Yeah. Yep, I see it. And actually, there's a simple answer to this, both. All right, when you're doing the modeling, you are providing both input, all right? So if you know the child does not know on their device or system how to ask for pink lemonade, all right, you could certainly model that. Oh, you'd like some pink lemonade? I want pink lemonade. Model that. And then also you can use that device to communicate back. So, it can certainly be used. That system can be used in both ways, providing the model for them as well as using it to communicate to them. I have a student that he has an AAC app on his iPad, and I have that same AAC app on my iPad, and he loves when I come into school because I open up my app, and he loves the fact that I'm using it to communicate with him. Even though it's on my iPad, he's using his as well. So it's become a very kind of social reciprocal activity for us. But again, you don't have to have that. I mean, you can communicate right on that one person's system or device.
Okay.
Okay, next question.
Next question, I guess, is more on the school's funding for iPads and AAC devices. We have this question from Anne. Anne asks us, are schools responsible for providing the AAC, such as an iPad? Our district had SWAC evaluate and provide an iPad for demonstration and to see if Avaz would work. We liked it, but they said that was for demonstration, that we need to provide and buy the program. I was okay with that, but at another training they said the district had to provide. What is it? This is specifically for the state of Colorado. Yeah.
Go ahead, Hari. Did you want to say something or no? Or do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, if you have any inputs, you can go ahead on this, Susan. But I was thinking it might be a better way for me to connect with Anne over mail and then take it up.
Definitely that, absolutely. But I just want to say that an AAC device system app, again, whether it's purchasing an iPad and it's the Avaz app or any of the different AAC apps that are out there, that's assistive technology, all right, and that becomes part of that child's IEP. So that becomes an evaluation and an IEP team determination. And so if it's something, when we look at the laws for providing assistive technology, school districts are absolutely responsible for providing if the IEP team has determined that this piece of equipment is necessary. So, that's just federal law. I mean, I can tell you that because I'm not from the state of Colorado, but that is absolutely, federal law. So, AAC definitely falls under the realm of, when we're talking about the high-tech, the higher-tech systems, definitely falls under the realm of assistive technology, which falls under the realm of the IEP.
Okay. Great. In any case, I will just mail Anne and try to find the issue in more detail. We have one more question from Suzanne Pell. Susan wants to know, how do I start an AAC evaluation? What resources are available to guide me?
Okay, there are, I can tell you there's a wonderful website, the University of Washington, the state of Washington, University of Washington, they have a wonderful AAC website that kind of walks you through the process. And I'm assuming Susan, who asked the question, is an SLP, because it's typically SLPs that should be doing an AAC evaluation, along with input from other team members, like it could be from like an occupational therapist, absolutely input from parents, family members, and even that AAC potential user if possible. But typically it's the SLP, the speech language pathologist, that is the one that is the primary person doing the AAC evaluation. So, you know, again, University of Washington, they have a great website. I can also share with you an app that is fabulous. It's an AAC evaluation app, and it's called AAC Evaluation Genie, that takes you through 14 different areas to consider. I mean, starting with looking at visual discrimination, visual identification, understanding vocabulary from, you know, core vocabulary, etc. So that's an app that does the evaluation and also prints out a report. But again, if you're not an SLP, then my primary advice would be seeking out an SLP that could guide the team in this evaluation.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Susan. I think that answers the question. And Susan Pell is an SLP. She has just confirmed on chat. So I think she would for sure go through the University of Washington resource base you have referred to.
Okay, yeah. Great.
We have one final question before we close the webinar, Susan. This question is from Xavier. He asks us, when is the right time to move from low-tech AAC to high-tech AAC?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure if there's a specific rule of thumb for this. What I've done, I'll tell you one thing that I've done, that if I feel like my students' vocabulary needs are not being met by that low-tech device, then that's a definite red flag for me. We need to look at something more sophisticated, which pretty much the high-tech devices, allow them to be able to, to expand their vocabulary quite a bit. I've also, though, had some other AAC users where we're using low-tech, and they haven't progressed. It's like we're kind of like at a plateau. So then we've gone to, and this has been the beauty, truly, of the iPad and the AAC apps, that we've started looking at some of those, and that has actually increased the motivation for some of my users, so that they're no longer at a plateau because they're now more motivated using this higher level of technology.
Okay. Fine, Susan. I think this brings us to the end of this session.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for listening in.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for an insightful session. I do hope that the audience did gain a lot from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.